After nearly 3 years, FNAF's greatest mystery has finally been solved. Since the release of Security Breach, theorists have been trying to rack their brains over the mystery of Nightmarionne, who appears to be haunting the Pizzaplex in every corner of FNAF's modern era. And in today's video, I believe that I've actually solved what Nightmarionne is, as well as finally answering exactly what's going on with the Nightmare Plush mystery. So, what exactly are the Nightmare Plushies? Well, in Security Breach, if you take a good look around the Pizzaplex, you might notice that there's quite a few of these puppet-looking plushies hidden around the place. From the back stairwell of Bonnie Bowl to the entrance of Monty Golf, and even tucked in a Freddy plush hanging from the ceiling. The main reason we even know what these things are called is actually thanks to one of them being a collectible all the way down in an offshoot room of the endoskeleton nursery, giving the name of Nightmare Plush. Curiously though, that makes their existence even more confusing since they generally don't even own that name. The name Nightmare comes from FNAF 4, not specifically from the nightmares, but actually Nightmare himself, a black version of Nightmare Fredbear who unsurprisingly doesn't look all too much like the puppet. Instead, the Nightmare Plushies themselves are actually based off Nightmarionne, a nightmarish version of the puppet first seen in Five Nights at Freddy's 4's Halloween update. That update, however, has always been deemed strictly non-canon, which is why even with his appearances in Ultimate Custom Night and Help Wanted, fans didn't really bat Nightmarionne any more of an eye than they would have one of the Jackos. So how did we go from Nightmarionne being a non-canon character to becoming the face of one of FNAF's greatest modern mysteries? Well, to figure out exactly what's going on here, I think we're gonna need to take a step back all the way to Five Nights at Freddy's 2. In Five Nights at Freddy's 2, like with Golden Freddy in the first game, players have a slim chance of encountering the infamous Shadow Animatronics, either finding a shadowy version of Golden Freddy slumped in the parts and service room, or coming face to face with a pitch black version of Toy Bonnie, known as RWQFSFASXC, standing in the office and ready to crash your game. Due to Golden Freddy becoming a pretty standard enemy in FNAF 2 instead of a rare occurrence like in the first game, these guys serve to fill that gap in FNAF 2, giving us hands down FNAF's most enigmatic animatronics to date, who frankly wouldn't even serve much of a role until FNAF 3. In Five Nights at Freddy's 3, we get to see way more of the shadows, with Shadow Freddy basically recreating the MCI by luring the animatronics to the safe room during Follow Me. Meanwhile, Shadow Bonnie seems to be helping the children out instead, hopping between memories in FNAF 3's secret minigame to bring cake to Jeremy, the shadowy child possessing Bonnie. Shadow Bonnie would also get some of his own context, thanks to his ties to Fredbear's Family Diner in Stage 01, and this rare Spring Bonnie poster found on the cameras in FNAF 3 linking him back to a suspiciously sinister Bonnie paper pal from FNAF 2. This means that not only does Shadow Bonnie and his 4 upper teeth actually match closer with Spring Bonnie than Toy Bonnie, but that Shadow Bonnie and maybe even Shadow Freddy's existence might have been first hinted at by the paper pals in this very party room. Despite FNAF 3 giving some pretty solid context as to what these guys are, it did however create even more questions than answers by introducing some of its own new Shadow Animatronics, though ones that wouldn't really see nearly as much fanfare as the main Shadows, with fans not even realizing some of them were unique characters till they received their very own pages in FNAF's character encyclopedia. FNAF 3's first 3 minigames introduced the Shadow Balloon Boys, Shadow Cupcakes, and Shadow Puppet, all of which seem to have their own varying level of symbolism. The Shadow Cupcakes, often missed by fans in the underneath area of Chica's party, are symbolic of the 5 missing children, with the Shadow Cupcake following us being Golden Freddy, the most restless of the group. Similarly, in Mangle's quest, while falling to the underneath, we can see a large shadowy version of the puppet with tear streams running down to the floor. Although some have said that this represents the crying child based on his position and tear streams during FNAF 4's ending, based on the legs themselves having stripes, I'd say that it does still instead represent Charlotte, the spirit possessing the puppet. And as for the Shadow Balloon Boys, yeah, they're a little tricky. Not often does the FNAF series do things in sets of 3 beyond maybe the Afton children. And while I'd love to say that these little guys represent their restless spirits waiting for their happiest day under that dang tree that keeps appearing in every game since Pizzeria Simulator, that might be a little too overreaching. That at least is all to say that FNAF does have quite a few more Shadow Animatronics than many fans even realize, and I believe our final 2 may be the most important when it comes to this mystery. In Five Nights at Freddy's 4, Shadow Freddy finally takes center stage becoming Nightmare, a black and gold counterpart to Nightmare Fredbear who torments Mike during his nightmares. However, Nightmare has his own counterpart, Nightmarionne, who fills his role in FNAF 4's Halloween edition, using the exact same jumpscare sound and everything. Based on this, it sounds like if we're looking to figure out Nightmarionne and the Nightmare Plushies, the key to solving them may very well come down to something about Nightmare, but that begs the question of what he really is. All in all, now that we've looked over basically every Shadow animatronic, How do they work? And more importantly, what causes them? Well, the answer to that comes down to explaining FNAF's most dangerous substance, agony. In FNAF, tragedies have a way of taking on a life of their own, and this is exactly what the shadows are. To not get too wordy with the science of it all, when something bad, and I mean really bad, happens in the FNAF franchise, it creates agony, a dark, wispy substance seen most prominently in FNAF AR. Oftentimes, agony is a part of the process that ties a spirit to an object or animatronic. However, in rare cases of an extreme tragedy, that agony can even manifest into its own entity. Agony entities are what I refer to the shadows as, aka non-physical entities that have taken shape based on specific events in the FNAF timeline. The reason we know this is mainly thanks to Shadow Freddy, since it's clear from his appearance as Nightmare that he is somehow heavily tied to the Bite of 83. Not only does he appear as Nightmare, the inverse of Nightmare Fredbear who represents the Bite, but his clearly broken jaw in FNAF world pretty much seals the deal that he does have something to do with the Bite. While I do think he could have been spawned from something a little different before the Bite, it's pretty clear that the agony of the Bite is what makes Shadow Freddy what he is. Oftentimes, theories about the shadows come down to what event you think spawned them, sometimes with quite a few options to choose from. Shadow Bonnie's always been a bit of a tougher topic, with some thinking he was created from the DCI due to looking like Toy Bonnie, the MCI from his connection to Spring Bonnie, or even the murder of Charlotte Emily, usually if you think he's the footprints in Midnight Motorist leading the crying child to her murder. Thanks to this theme of starting from tragedy, creatures like these also have a habit of even finding more tragedies to continue to feed on. That's mainly why we see them following us through the classic FNAF games, from FNAF 2 to FNAF 1 and Follow Me, into Mike's dreams to feed off his torment, and even decades later in FNAF 3. Wherever there's tragedy, or an opportunity to feed off the agony linked to the Freddy's franchise, the shadows will find it. And that's why taking a good look over the modern FNAF timeline for them has been so strange, because simply put, they're not really there. Shadow Bonnie does of course appear in AR, serving as a warning against collecting Shadowy Remnant, but when it comes to the Mega Pizzaplex, basically tragedy central in modern FNAF, there's not a shadow in sight. Yet, the one thing that is there is Nightmarionne, and that's something that's got theorists thinking. To be clear, the Nightmare Plushies aren't just hidden around Security Breach. They also appear in the Ruin DLC, yet again as a collectible, and even all the way down in the Mimic's lair. Hell, one even appears during Princess Quest 4 in Help Wanted 2, just chilling behind a pillar in a place he very much should not be. So why is all this happening? Well, all that isn't even where things end, as Nightmarionne has made one more appearance in a way I don't think anyone was expecting. In Secret of the Mimic, if you're composed enough during Jackie's chase scene to stop and get a good look at her, then you might have noticed that as her costume deteriorates, she begins looking more and more like Nightmarionne, from the black tear streams to losing her nose, and even her long arms gaining a distinct stripy pattern. Thus, it's clear there is some sort of tangible connection between Nightmarionne and Jackie. But what is it? Well, this isn't something I find myself saying too often, but I think game theory was right. Based around the first Secret of the Mimic trailer, they did a video connecting Jackie to one specific character in the FNAF series, and I think they nailed who that was, but ultimately didn't realize the full picture of what that connection meant. Think all the way back to how earlier in this video, I explained the Paperpals and their connection to the Shadow Animatronics. While thinking about Jackie, I thought back to those Paperpals, and how sure enough, Jackie does match the Paper Buddy pretty dang well, but at the same time doesn't pair well with the others. After all, we've already established that these are Freddy and a Bonnie, who may even represent Shadow Bonnie, so what does that really have to do with Jackie? Well, for the longest time, I've been wondering what these three truly represent. What could possibly be the uniting theme between these three Paperpals? For a while, I've imagined that these might be Fredbear, Spring Bonnie, and the Puppet, representing the three animatronics present at Fredbear's Family Diner. However, obviously the design of this guy never exactly matched the Puppet as well as the others, or at least it didn't until Jackie came around, who not only has direct connections to the Puppet, but Nightmarionne himself. I believe these Paperpals do show not only the animatronics of Fredbear's Family Diner, but also each one's shadow counterpart, being Shadow Freddy, Shadow Bonnie, and Nightmarionne. And as soon as that clicked with me, everything started to make sense. Whenever it comes to figuring out the shadows, the hard part is always which event you think they came from. Like I said, Shadow Bonnie and even Shadow Freddy have had their origins hotly debated, and thinking about that again with this new concept context made me realize something. Oftentimes, you'll see theorists, including myself in the past, claim that either Shadow Freddy or Shadow Bonnie came from Charlotte's murder, but something about that never really sat right with me. Of course, an event like that could maybe create a shadow, but I don't think it would look like either Shadow Freddy or Shadow Bonnie, since those animatronics don't have much to do with that incident. That's why many choose to link them to events that make a little more sense, like Shadow Freddy to the bite based on Fredbear, or Shadow Bonnie to the MCI thanks to the Spring Bonnie suit. But let's not forget something. We've just established that Charlotte's murder is simultaneously an event we think is strong enough to create an entity, yet impossible to link to either Shadow Freddy or Bonnie. And that's where we've been thinking about this all wrong. Nightmarionne is not just a nightmare. It's the Shadow Puppet, completing the set of every Fredbear's animatronic having a shadow counterpart, and being an entity we know actively exists, ultimately revealing that Charlotte's murder is what created the Shadow Puppet. The unrealized existence of the Shadow Puppet, an entity formed from the murder of Charlotte at Fredbear's Family Diner, is what I believe 100% solves the Nightmarionne mystery. No, Nightmarionne isn't some weird manifestation of Shadow Freddy, literally Charlotte, or even death itself, but instead the Shadow Puppet, something that's been under our noses for nearly 10 years. Earlier, when I said it was weird that the Pizzaplex didn't have any shadow animatronics, that's because it instead has been right in front of us, corrupting the puppet-themed staff bots and watching us through its little plushies all across the Pizzaplex. Nightmarionne is the shadow animatronic looming over the Pizzaplex, feeding off all its tragedy, being the Pizzaplex's greatest secret threat. After all, Nightmarionne is a fearful reflection of what William created, which we all knew was the puppet, but in a more literal way than any of us first assumed. So, with Nightmarionne, the shadow puppet, all figured out, how does that affect what comes next for FNAF? Well, I expect that if we hadn't figured it out by now, the truth of Nightmarionne would have been something revealed in a presumable Secret of the Mimic DLC, which based on everything we've come to know about Nightmarionne in this game's story, I think would be taking place around Fall Fest 1983 just like in Curse of Dreadbear. But there is a catch. Whatever night of Fall Fest we see focused on in the DLC, likely Halloween night, will also be the exact night of Midnight Motorist and the night of Charlotte Emily's murder. If you were still wondering why Shadow Freddy and Nightmare seem so connected to the Shadow Puppet, aside from them spawning in the exact same way from the murders of two of FNAF's most important characters, then look no further than the fact that if Shadow Freddy, the crying child's imaginary friend before even the bite happened, is the one luring him away during Midnight Motorist, then we have a chance for both of them to run into none other than Charlotte's murder and the Shadow Puppet, all happening on that very same Fall Fest night. And that's how I solved Nightmarionne, FNAF's greatest modern mystery.